Thank you for those wonderful words of introduction. And here we are. Good afternoon, all. Every once in a while, we come across a discovery or an interruption that shakes the very foundation of what we believe to be a historical fact. It alters our understanding of people and events that we have long overlooked or misunderstood. All her life, Kasturba was considered uneducated and unlettered. There is such a dearth of information about her life. She was hidden in the tall historical shadow of Mahatma. A couple of years ago, a diary was found at Kasturba Ashram in Indore, and her great-grandson, Tushar Gandhi, took it upon himself to bring to the world the Lost Diary of Kastur, his bar. Through this book, we got to hear from Kasturba in her own voice, and we are lucky to have uncovered not just the truth of who she was as an individual, but also the weight of her contributions as a satyagrahi and a freedom fighter in her own right. Today we are really blessed to have with us the great grandson of Kasturba and Mohandas, Karamchand Gandhi.
Thank you very much.
And he is the founder president of Mahatma Gandhi Foundation, president of the Lok Seva Trust, and the director of Gandhi Research Foundation. In 2005, he commemorated the 75th anniversary of the Dandi March by organizing a re-enactment of the 241-mile-long walk, and was instrumental in getting that hallowed route declared as India's historic heritage route. I would like to offer my pranams to you, Mr. Gandhi. Welcome to Kozhikode and Kerala Literature Fest.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It is indeed a privilege and honor to be here amongst all of you and to be able to speak about my new book. Thank you so very much.
The discovery of this diary, especially at this point in our cultural timeline, is absolutely invaluable. Could you tell us how you discovered it and what happened next? Why did you decide to embark on what I am calling a journey of disbelief for all of us?
I cannot take the credit of discovering the diary because I had no part to play in the actual discovery of the diary. I am part of the Gandhi Research Foundation, and as part of their work, they visit all the known historical Gandhian institutions and look through everything that they have over there to see if there is anything of historical importance that has been overlooked. So on one of the trips in Indore to the Kasturba Memorial Ashram in Indore, they were looking through all the abandoned cupboards and trunks and boxes and all that, and in one of the trunk they found this small pocket diary which was in a very bad condition, deteriorating and things, and when they flipped through it, it looked as if it was somebody's diary. Now, in the group who had gone there and who discovered the diary, there was nobody who could read Gujarati, and they could make out that the diary was written in Gujarati. So they brought it back to Jalgaon because it required restoration and a lot of repair work and things. So they had the facilities in Jalgaon, and they said, we will do it and give the diary back to Indore. And in Jalgaon, there was somebody who knew Gujarati, and he started reading the diary. And while reading that diary, it's it emerged that the timeline that was written in that diary, it is a day-to-day account of a period of 9 months in 1933. And when they started reading it, they discovered that it correlated with the known history of Ba's life of that time. And so the interest peaked and they correlated all the entries, as many as they could, and it was discovered that it was Ba's diary. So one of my visits over there, I was told that Ba's diary has been found. And like everybody else, I laughed. I said, how can that be? You know, Ba could not write or read. She couldn't have written a diary. So they said, no, please, would you like to take a look at it? And I said, yes, sure. Let me just take a look at what this is all about. And so they had, by that time, they had restored the diary and sent it back to the original organization, but they had digitized the whole thing. So they had the images on computer and they sent me all the images. And when I sat down to read it, it was a very unbelievable experience for me, because as I read that diary, I felt as if Ba was talking to me. Because I immediately realized that the language written in that diary was colloquial spoken Gujarati. It wasn't an educated language. It was somebody who was not educated, somebody who was not taught writing, who was writing as she would have spoken. And it was a very moving experience for me. And I think on the first sitting itself, I read the diary 3 or 4 times repeatedly without stopping, and there were tears running down my cheek because it was a very emotional issue. It was also a moment which made me realize how guilty I was of having neglected Ba and not having bothered to even try to find anything out about her. Just living with the notion that she was illiterate and she was just Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's wife and nothing more than that. And so there was a lot of guilt also. And when I spoke to my family, my father and his sisters who had spent time with both Ba and Bapu on the ashrams, their first reaction also was that no, Ba couldn't write, she couldn't have written. When I was very insistent that it was her writing, they said, okay, maybe she dictated and somebody else wrote because she couldn't write. And I said no, because if there was any intermediary who had written what Ba was saying, then that person would have corrected Ba's writing and not written in that kind of a language. And I said, no, this has to be Ba's writing in her own language. And what convinced me was that when you start reading it, you realize that it is a conversation that the writer is having with someone very dear who is absent. And when I read the diary and the dates, corresponding dates, all the entries are of the time when Ba was away from Bapu. When Ba was in another prison and Bapu was in another prison, and they were separated from one another. And I realized that she, in her own mind, had decided that she was going to let Bapu know what she was doing on the days when she wasn't with him. Because there are gaps in the diary, and those gaps are at the time when she was visiting Bapu. So as soon as she was with Bapu, she didn't write. And when she wasn't with Bapu, she was writing. And so I got more and more convinced that it was Ba's diary, and it was absolutely fascinating.
Did you experience any kind of conflict? Because in the preface you have said that you were initially contemplating on, giving the narrative a different kind of flavor for making it more accessible or more readable for the audience or any readers that were there at the larger spectrum. So how would you look at it? You never tampered with the way in which the diary was written.
Initially it was, I had a dilemma. When I wrote it, I started it as I would just decipher the diary so that people could read it easily, because Ba also had written it in a very rough kind of handwriting, which was difficult to read. So I said, let me just decipher it so people can read it. Then I realized that just plainly deciphering it means that only people who understood Gujarati would be able to understand Ba. And this was the first time that a prime source was available for understanding and knowing Ba. Ba in her own words. And so I decided that no, let me also translate it. And then again, the dilemma hit me, because as soon as I decided to translate it into English, the educated scholar in me wanted to impress with my own language. And then I realized that it would not be fair with the readers, because the whole idea of the diary of Ba was that it would be, the reader would get to know Ba herself. She didn't have to know my words or listen to my words. And so I wrote the whole thing in the same kind of broken language, wrong grammar and everything, verbatim. It was very funny that for the first draft of my manuscript, when I submitted it to HarperCollins, my editor was horrified. And she said, what kind of a writer is this? He expects us to publish such a faulty and wrong manuscript. And she wrote to me and she said, we can't accept this. This is below our standard. And I had a tough time explaining to and convincing her that this is Kasturba's diary and it has to be in her language. It can't be in my language. If I was to write it in my language, it would be dishonest. Fortunately, finally they agreed to me and they published it. And most of the praise for the book has come because the readers get the flavor of who Ba was without any corruption or influence of the writer.
See, the existence of this diary changes the way we think about such a prominent figure, as you said, who has long been ignored.
Yeah.
It might be history for us, but for you this is a deeply, not a political but personal, it's your family.
Yeah.
And what was the biggest dilemma you would have faced in bringing these new truths to life?
As I told you that for me it was a privilege to be able to write this and decipher the diary of Ba, because one of the things I was convinced about was that nobody else would have done this. So I felt that I was blessed that I got the opportunity to do this. There was a vacuum about Ba. Nobody knew about her. And due to the power of the internet, a lot of material has come through. And in my research on Bapu in general, I came across 3 or 4 places where Bapu, after having lost Ba, has acknowledged her importance in his life and paid tributes to her when he writes in answer to the Viceroy, who has sent him a condolences letter. He talks about the importance of Ba in his life. When he's traveling through Noakhali on the anniversary of Ba's passing, he hallucinates that Ba has come back and she's with him, illustrating how much he missed her and felt incomplete without her. And we never understood or accepted that importance of Ba in, or even Bapu's life, let alone the freedom movement. There's a very telling incident that happened when in 1942, after Bapu was arrested for the Quit India movement and taken to the Aga Khan Palace, 3 days later, Ba also was brought to the Aga Khan Palace. And when Bapu saw her coming to the Aga Khan Palace, he said, "Oh, so you came to stay with me?" kind of thing. And Ba said, no, I have been arrested because I defied the British on my own. I decided to speak at the public meeting where you would have spoken, and the British have charged me by breaking the law and arrested me on my own. So Bapu said, oh, that means you are a satyagrahi. And so that was the importance of her last incarceration. And after losing her, Bapu wrote that Ba was a satyagrahi on her own, in her own right, and her passing away while under arrest by the British makes her no less a martyr than any other martyr to the cause of freedom. Unfortunately, we have forgotten that importance of that woman. And so it gave me much more pleasure to write about that and show that, because in the course of the diary, Ba is arrested and re-arrested 3 times. And at one occasion, they are released, and the collector passes an order saying that they must leave the jail's precincts and stay within a certain boundary which is told to them, that, and that means that they would be staying inside the ashram. And Ba says, no, we're going to defy this straight away. So they go out and stay inside the jail compound. And they said, we are not moving out of here, arrest us again. So that was the spirit that we have never ever understood of not only Ba, but many other women who, without being recognized, made these kind of brave sacrifices. And this book, although it is about Ba, it's about all those anonymous women who contributed to their best abilities to our freedom movement.
And I should tell you that I grew up hearing stories of Mahatma Gandhi from my grandfather, who was also a freedom fighter, who worked at Sabarmati Ashram after graduating from Banaras Hindu University. And he once told us that it was Gandhiji who taught his wife to read and write. But in all these years, it was almost an accepted national fact that Kasturba was illiterate. Now that we have her diary, one wonders, do you know the circumstances under which that she might have decided to write this diary?
I think, as I told you right in the beginning, if you read the diary, you will notice that it is addressed to a person she respects. The first entry in the diary is, I bow to so-and-so kind of thing. So it is addressed to somebody, and the whole diary is written in a communicative manner. And talks about what I did today, and sometimes she even grumbles, I'm writing this diary, but I'm so bored. I just keep on doing the same old things every day, and I write about the same old things. Why am I doing this? And things like that. So it's not a very intellectual written diary. It's just a very basic record of her day-to-day life. But within that, there are gems in history. Like when Bapu starts his fast for the rights of the untouchables in Yarwada jail, Ba comes to know about it while she is in Sabarmati prison, and she writes a very political comment in her diary. She says, this fast of Bapu illustrates that he is losing faith in his followers. It's a very profound statement, just one statement. She doesn't say anything else, but it tells you that the fast is because Bapu is disappointed by the honesty of those who were closest to him. And the fast was for that reason. And that is how we also come to know why Bapu fasted. It is, everybody keeps saying that he fasted as a form of blackmail. None of his fasts were to blackmail anyone. His fasts were for atonement of his own shortcomings or the shortcomings of those who were closest to him. And those are the kind of factors that these kind of intimate revelations may tell us about both of them, about Ba and Bapu. And that is where this diary at least becomes important in understanding. And that's why I in the whole diary, I don't refer to Bapu as Mahatma, because the Mahatma identity is unbelievable. We need to understand Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, the ordinary human being who rose beyond his capabilities to achieve things, because only that will make him believable, and only that will make him somebody that we will aspire to follow. When we put him on the pedestal of the Mahatma, then we convince ourselves that he was a Mahatma, he could do all those things. We don't need to do any of those because we are ordinary human beings. He was as ordinary as any one of us, and yet he did what he did. And that should be what should be brought back to the people.
And I've read that she faced a lot of heartache because of the lifelong tussle between her eldest son and her husband. It was very poignant to read about the kind of struggle that she had. And from her diary, were you able to get a better understanding of this struggle, of this dynamic that existed between two individuals who have completely or selflessly devoted their life to life for a nation?
Yes, in the diary entries, Harilal makes an entry only once when he accompanies Ba from Mumbai to Pune, when Bapu is going to be released from Yarwada and Ba wants to be there to receive him. But the way Ba writes about it, one can make out that she is so happy that her son, the wayward son whom she lost, has come back to her. And it's just 2 days that he is with her, but those 2 days she seems to have lived a lifetime in that. Ba's tragedy was that she was in the middle of a misunderstanding of huge magnitudes between two of her most loved men. Her eldest surviving son and the man whom she spent the whole life from the age of 13 till almost 6 decades together. And she had to choose. She had no option. And in that she lost her son. So that was one of the greatest tragedy, seeing the sorrow of both the men and having to live with that. I think more than suffering sorrow ourselves, watching our loved ones suffer is much more difficult, and Ba had to do that. So it was, it must have taken a tremendous toll on her. Yes.
So in this book, you have captured the delicate kind of relationship between Bapu and Kasturba. And I should say that as a reader, maybe all of us would find it very new because we have never seen or heard of this extraordinary woman in all the lessons or school plays or movies that we have seen about the life of Gandhiji. Could you tell us more about the kind of uniqueness that you have discovered about the kind of relationship that they had?
The mutual respect between the two is very apparent when you read this. And when I was researching to flesh out the biographical part of Ba's life, I had a big problem over there also, because there have been biographies of Ba written. But when I used to read those biographies, and my parents also wrote a very comprehensive biography of Ba. But when I was reading that biography, the presence of Bapu was very strong in that, and it felt as if Ba's life was only as much as it was spent with Bapu. And so I said, no, I'm not going to repeat that. I will use references from what is written previously, but if I'm going to write, I'm going to write the biography of the individual, not the woman married to a great person. And that is where in the biographical section of my book, I have made it a point to mention her as Kastur Kapadia. I don't even mention her as Basa. Many people said, what a impudent great-grandson. He calls his great-grandmother by her first name. I said, no, I'm a writer, and as a writer, I'm going to present an individual woman devoid of all her other identities. And so I made a conscious effort to humanize both Bapu and Ba. And so when Bapu behaved unpardonably, I've written that without glossing over it at all. And when Ba was adamant, I've even written about that. Like, the biggest clash between Ba and Bapu was Bapu's continuing effort to educate Ba and Ba's adamant refusal to learn from Bapu. So every time Bapu enforced that, the teaching part of it, within a few days or so, Ba would throw a tantrum and walk off. And the same Kastur, when Bapu wasn't there, would pester Meera and Sushila Nair and them to teach her. So it wasn't as if she didn't want to learn, but she was adamant that no, how dare my husband try to boss over me? I'm not going to learn from him. And for the entire life, even in the last phase in Aga Khan Palace, when Bapu said, now there's nothing else to do for the two of us, we'll spend time when I'll teach you. And within 4 days, Ba threw a tantrum and walked out and said, I'm not going to learn from you. So that streak of independence was also there, defiance was also there, and Bapu's benevolence was also there. He never said, crack the whip and said, sit down at my feet and learn, you're my wife. If she didn't want to learn and she said, no, I'm not going to learn from you, he said, okay, it's up to you, your choice. And he acknowledged her to be his teacher also at very important things that became his life's ideology. He credits her to be his teacher in passive disobedience. He said, I learned, passive disobedience from my wife when she defied me in that manner. And many other places also he acknowledges her to be the strength that he required when he was at a crossroads. In his brahmacharya experiments, when he takes the vow of brahmacharya, he writes that I took the vow several times in South Africa. And on several times I lost out to my flesh's desire. And every time Ba, without mocking him or reminding him of the vow, accepted him. And when finally he took the vow and did not break it, Ba never went to him and says, how can you be so unjust to me, kind of thing. She accepted it. And she honored that pledge that her husband had done. And from that time onwards, she saw to it that she was supportive of him. And that is where, on several occasions when the brahmacharya experiments happened in the ashram, Ba did not feel threatened by those things because she had implicit trust in her husband and knew that he's testing himself and he's not going to go beyond the lines of societal norms and decency. She had that faith even when it was felt that Bapu was head over heels in love with Sarla Devi. And Rajaji came to Ba and said, stop him, he's going to make a fool of himself and you will lose him. She said, you don't know my husband. I know my husband and I know why he is doing it and I know where he will stop. I'm not threatened, I'm not... that kind of faith can only come from a relationship which is beyond what we imagine to be relationships and love. And we must understand that the relationship grew from the age of 13 when they would not even have understood what a husband-wife relationship was. The first thing that Bapu did after getting married was buying a manual which taught how to be a good husband. So, that was the kind of knowledge they had about what it meant to be married. And from there, such a long journey and relationship going through so many changes. I keep saying that Ba married one boy, but she cohabited with several men because Bapu went through so many changes that it was like, each change, it was like marrying somebody new and living with him. Because from a timid young boy, he becomes a confident lawyer, Western educated, comes back. From there, he becomes a leader of people. Then he becomes something totally different, somebody who's forever giving up things. And think of Ba, who always wanted to be married to a conventional husband, having to live with so many men throughout her life. It must have been quite a tough task for her. Just doing that shows us the strength of her character, and we never appreciated that. And I consider myself to be the greatest to blame for that, because I should have been the one who should have understood that greatness of that woman. After all, if everybody says I have the Gandhi blood in me, more of it is of Kastur than of Mohan. And yet I myself am guilty of consigning her to anonymity and reducing her. Even you talked about films and things. Yes, she's there throughout Gandhi, but they didn't have to use Rohini Attangadi to act that role. Richard Attenborough could have just made a cardboard cutout and kept it in every scene, because that's all that Kasturba did over there. And yet, there are so many aspects of this woman. There's another incident. I'm sorry I keep talking, but when I talk about Ba, I just can't stop. There is a photograph of Ba washing Bapu's feet. And that photograph, even today, garners a lot of criticism from feminists. And even in her time, she got bombarded by complaints by feminists saying, you could have done this inside your hut, why did you have to do it in open? You've subjected the whole females, all the females of the world, to a subservient role in society. As it is, we are oppressed, and you have now iconized that oppression. And Ba very astutely wrote back and said, I have lost my husband to society. He's become a public figure, and nothing is left for me. This is the only thing that I can do which makes me connected with my husband. Why do you want to take it away from me? And then she writes a very biting comment. She says, in South Africa, when I did not have a doctor, he delivered the last 2 children that were born to me. And because of the difficult deliveries, I had to be bedridden for almost 6 weeks after both the deliveries. He nursed me back to health. He did everything for me. He sponged me, he cleaned me, gave me a bedpan, did all the things that I would never have imagined a husband doing. And you don't know about it because there was no photographer chasing us at that time to take photographs of what he has done for me. Now if I am doing one duty for my husband out of the love of my heart for him, you brand me as a subservient woman harming the cause of women. And I think the answer is only something that a very feminist kind of independent woman would have had the courage to give. And accept that, yes, I myself will voluntarily do this. It shows the courage of her character. Otherwise she could have said, oh my God, what have I done? I better change. She said, I am not going to change. If you don't like it, don't look at it. So this shows the aspects of her, the depth of her character, and we turned her into a one-dimensional cardboard cutout.
And I think, and then we celebrate, or we feel that the whole notion of ahimsa or non-violence is associated with Bapu. But Bapu himself, I think, has said that it was Kasturba who taught me this whole concept of non-violence or ahimsa. Would you like to speak about that?
Well, this was in the initial phase of their married life, when Bapu, as a 14-year-old boy, went and bought a manual of what an ideal husband should be like, and every evening he would read one chapter of that manual and then try it out on Ba to see how it worked. And one of the things that the manual suggested was that a husband, to ensure his supremacy over his wife, must lay down the rules that the wife has to obey. And one of the things that was told or written over there was that a good husband will never allow his wife to step out of his home without his permission. And Bapu had seen that every evening Kastur used to dress up and then leave home and go away for a couple of hours and then come back. And she never bothered to ask him for permission. So he told her one day, he said, tomorrow onwards you're not going to leave the house without taking my permission. And if I don't give you permission, you can't go out. And to his horror, the next day, Ba again just dressed up and walked out. So when she came, then in her absence, and Bapu writes this in his autobiography, he says, in her absence, I read the manual and I said, what do I do if my wife doesn't listen to me? And the answer was that you punish her. So that evening he tells her, look, now if you don't listen to me, I will punish you. And Ba does the same thing the next day. So he reads again and he says, this is, I don't know, she is not even scared of being punished. So the book says that in that case you have to send her back home and abandon her, because she's not worth, she's a wayward woman, you can't have her as a wife. So Bapu puts down the law and says, tomorrow if you step out of the house, don't come back. Go to your house, you'll no longer be my wife. So then Ba tells him that, okay, tomorrow when your mother tells me to accompany her to the temple, I'm going to tell her I'm not coming. So Bapu was shocked. He said, you'll defy my mother? He said, look, you have set down the rules. So either I defy you or I defy your mother. You decide. And he says, you dare not defy my mother, which meant that he was saying, okay, I give up, you defy me, kind of thing. And later on, Bapu in his autobiography writes that that was the first lesson of the power of civil disobedience that I was taught. And when I implemented it, I realized that what Ba had done to me at that point of time in my life was my first lesson in civil disobedience and non-violence, because he says I had never ever experienced that before that. And these were the kind of episodes that happened in their lives. Even Bapu mentioned them. But when we read the autobiography, we just gloss over it and it doesn't register. Because to us, Kasturba is nothing, nobody to be studied or given importance to. So it just goes through our subconscious, but it doesn't register with us.
And one more thing, that is, there is a special relationship between Putlibai,
Yes.
Bapu's mother, and Kasturba. Could you tell the audience how special it was?
See, the thing was that Ba and Putliba were very close because, as I told you, she came to Rajkot when she was 13 as a bride. Youngest in the house. So she was the one who had to listen to her two elder sisters-in-law and her mother-in-law. And the hierarchies were very well established at that time. Now, when she was 15 years old, she lost her father-in-law. And so, it was at that time that Mohan also decided to go to England to become a lawyer. And so, two women in the house who were alone. They did not have a partner. Putliba, who was a widow, and Kastur, who was a salaried widow. Her husband was away. And so it was very natural that the two of them would gravitate towards each other, because the other two wives had their husbands and their families. And so a very deep bond formed for Kastur. And in Putliba, she also saw the absent mother with whom she had grown up in Porbandar. And so that was a reason where they could bond even further. And Putliba was the only other person who knew Mohan, the ordinary youth. Because as soon as he left for England, he became somebody special at that time, because there were so few people, young people going abroad to study, that just the trip going out made him special. And so his esteem had gone up. And but Putli knew him as the child with all his frailties and everything. And Kastur also was married to that person. She was trying to cling to him, not knowing who would come back. Because when she gets the first photograph from England, till her sister-in-law tells her who it is, she doesn't recognize Mohan, because he's now completely westernized. And I think when she saw that, she must have also been anxious that with all the changes, is there another change lurking in the shadows? He's become a complete stranger, a Western guy. Is there a madam behind him also? Because that used to be the greatest fear for the women left behind, that the foreign women were always there to grab their men, kind of thing. So that would also be an anxiety. And that would also make her closer to her mother-in-law, that, in that situation, the anchor would be the mother-in-law. And so those were the reasons that they came so close. And then during Bapu's absence, she loses Putliba also. She dies of a sudden illness. And so that must have been very traumatic for her.
And then in the popular narratives that I have come across, whether fiction or non-fiction, Kasturba is always generally portrayed as a victim, the woman in the shadow of a man who towered over history, the woman who bore the brunt of her husband's greatness. But now your book talks about a very different Kastur. And it's a personal question. How important was it for you to bring the real Ba?
No, my reason for writing this book was to portray the real Ba. I wanted to show the strong woman who was, and the influence she had not only on her husband's life but on the ashrams that her husband set up. Because Bapu set up the ashrams, but he was always absent. He was either in jail or leading the movements outside. And so Ba was the one who had to look after the community and run the ashram and all that. And so it was a great responsibility. And she performed very successfully. None of the ashrams sort of disintegrated in Bapu's absence. If you look at Khadi, she was the one who mastered spinning on the ashram the first. She actually became the instructor of spinning on the ashrams. And even getting women into the freedom movement, it was her, because she would go and sit on the stage with Bapu, that influenced other women, saying, if Bapu comes with his wife, then we can also go to the meeting. And that is how women started coming to his meetings. And so in a silent manner, she influenced not just the man or the family, but the entire movement also. And that is what I have tried to portray in my book.
So when I look at the lives, both their lives, see, when you travel across, especially when I have traveled across India, and I have seen how difficult it is for us to remain as India, because each 100 meters there is such a lot of difference. And here is a man who united the whole of India, because we've seen he was a crowd puller. And I should tell you, what is it? This is again something for you to recall. What it means to be Tushar Gandhi, the great grandson of Bapu.
Very proud of being the great grandson of Bapu. But I have a question for the audience. In this audience, how many of you believe that Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi is the father of the nation? I see quite a few hands raised. Then if you feel that he is the father of the nation, what makes me special? You are as much his children as I am. It's just a biological accident that I am his descendant, no? So why should I be special? Having said that, yes, the love, affection, recognition I get is beyond what I deserve. And it is only because you think that there must be some part of greatness of my ancestors in me. And when you come to know me, you get disappointed, and I'm sorry for it. But we are all, I think we are all Indians who believe that Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi is the father of the nation, are equally his inheritors as I am. Thank you.
And then, what are your future plans in terms of your writing career? What is next for Tushar Gandhi?
One of the things that I'd like to do is a dramatized biography of Ba. In the histofiction manner, I would like to make it with conversation and things like that. But there are a couple of other books that I would like to write. One is Anchal the Master is sitting over here, but I will be impudent enough to say that my next book might be on the subject of partition, biography of one of the silent heroines of partition who went to Pakistan alone and rescued girls who had been kidnapped and held hostage in Pakistan, what is today Pakistan. And although many more were left, but the few she brought back, she also managed to reunite them. And I've come across her autobiography of that period, and I want to write on it and expand on it. Maybe that will be my next book.
So here we are now. We'll take one or two questions from the audience. The floor is yours.
See, the idea of Kasturba, the girl, the woman, the teacher of Bapu, and also the grandmother, great grandmother, that story is an untold story. How important do you think it is in the context of the present politics of India, especially Gujarat, and corollary to that is Kerala, being Kerala, the generation of the scope is against Kerala, perhaps passionately, it was fashionable to late, engage in the court against Gandhi. So this story of Kasturba untold could have been much earlier, and I'm suggesting to you, we would not have been here the way we are. I'd like to hear.
No, I think this subject was waiting for me to discover it. I like to feel that because earlier in my life I had the privilege of also discovering a forgotten urn containing Bapu's ashes and immersing it in 1998. So I think as a descendant I am privileged to find things that were left incomplete and complete them and say this is one of it. So I admit that it took too long, but I think everything has a time, and the way it has been accepted and received by my readers, I think the time was just right for it to be told. Yeah. Yes, we'll come to you too.
Thank you very much, sir, for the insightful discussion and talk. But I'm distressed. In yesterday's Hindu newspaper, I read our Home Minister says India got independence not just because of non-violence, but also because of others. So, and parallelly, there are attempts throughout the country. They are seeing they're trying to rewrite the history, and they're trying to erase the memory of certain important personalities and rewrite and give importance for those people who are not part of the scenery those days. Your comments.
For those who because of their own inactions are not part of history, it would become very essential for them to write history suitable to them. So and Bapu himself had acknowledged that independence was not won only because of his attempts. He had given credit to everybody. Even the earlier attempts by the revolutionaries, Bapu acknowledged them always. He acknowledged the contribution of Netaji also. We don't need a Amit Shah to tell us those things. Amit Shah needs to say these things because he doesn't have anything to say about himself or the ideology he is spawned out of.
Thank you so much. I just had a quick glance at your book. I look forward to reading it. Now, there were also challenges in the relationship or causes of challenges. And I request your kind reflection how both of them dealt with that. One was around 1921. Bapu was one in fascination with a woman who was a relative of Tagore. And you know, Lord Kasturba write about it in her diary. My second query is about the visit to the temple of Lord Jagannath. And so how both of them handled that, you know?
I talked about Bapu's infatuation for Sarla Devi and how Ba handled it when there was a lot of distress on the ashram and anxiety in the ashram, and Rajaji also came to her saying, save your marriage, and Ba said, don't worry, I know my husband better than you know him. And so she handled it very well, and the infatuation died out very soon after that without it materializing. My fellow country people are not allowed to enter, and so he stopped over there. And Ba, being a devout Vaishnava, was very keen to do the darshan of Jagannath Puri. On the pretext of going to see, to do the darshan, she said, I'm going to sightsee in Puri, and Bapu thought that she would stop where the slightly lower castes were stopped, because only the highest two caste members were allowed to go into the sanctum sanctorum of Jagannath, the Puri temple. And so Bapu thought that she would stop where others were stopped, but Ba couldn't resist the temptation. She went in and did the darshan, and this news was brought to Bapu, and Bapu was very hurt and angered by it. Not just by Ba, what Ba did, but Ba was accompanied by Mahadev Desai's wife also, Prabhavati. And Bapu reprimanded Mahadev Desai, and he said, I failed to educate my wife, but your wife is educated. How did you fail to also make her understand that what she did was a crime? And Mahadev Desai in his diary writes that on that evening he was so offended by the public reprimand that he got that he wrote out his resignation and handed over to Bapu and said, you know, I am not fit enough to be close to you anymore, and I would like to be relieved. And then Bapu tells him, he says, are you going to deny me the father's ability to reprimand a son if he thinks he's wavered? That was the closeness that he shared with him. On both occasions, he realized that Ba was an individual in her own right. And he did fast as a repentance. But that was a repentance saying that I failed to make my wife understand why I was doing what I was doing. It wasn't a punishment to Ba. So that was the kind of thing that they did, and Ba also realized her mistake. It was immediately after the incident in Puri that Ba went to Rajkot and led the satyagraha against the king of Rajkot on her own and was imprisoned over there. And to test her, Bapu delayed his going to Rajkot by 4 days, saying, let me see if Ba breaks, because she was imprisoned in solitary imprisonment. He said, let me see if Ba breaks, or does she hold her own? And Ba holds her own, and when she finds out that Bapu has come, she tells Sushila Nair, why has he come? I didn't need him. That was her resolve. This was the kind of understanding, respect and closeness that both of them had amongst themselves. Thank you so very much, all of you.
As Mr. Gandhi, as we conclude, I would once again like to thank you for sharing the story of your great grandmother with us. As a woman, I find this discovery is especially poignant because we have gotten back a lost heroine who lived an epic life and was a leader and a freedom fighter. Thank you all, and thank you from all of us here at Kozhikode.